we have to clear everything so that we can have a better economy. They want to solve the problem. Let's start with that. Doctor, good evening.
A very good evening to you, David, and to all the viewers that have joined in, wherever they are joining in from, to be with us in this show. You see, David, the question you're asking about the chaos in Kampala city is a question you can ask about the chaos that we live in nearly every aspect of human endeavor in our country. Whether it is the institutions of government, it's not just KCCA. KCCA is an urban authority, but go to any local government in Uganda, go to any state institution, whether it's the judiciary, whether it's parliament. You may have seen some very nasty features in our parliament, people fighting and throwing all kinds of things at each other. That chaos that marks the situation in our country is indeed the symbol of the crisis that we are talking about, a crisis that cuts across, a crisis that is in the economy, that is in the social sector, education, health, environment, whatever you name it, in the cultural institutions. It's a crisis that is, like a pandemic. It's a crisis pandemic in our country. Now, the origin of this is what is important to understand, because without understanding where it comes from, it's very easy to get lost in the maze of what has been happening. You see, it all starts with the Ugandans losing control over their country, over having influence in their country. And this, you see, is historic. First of all, it started with the loss of control of our different nations. Uganda is a multinational country.
But
Uganda was a nation. Nkole was a nation. Busoga was a nation. These nations were crushed by external powers and forced to become one nation.
But
so Uganda is the formation of a crisis. The country itself is formed out of a crisis of destruction of indigenous nations and being forcefully united into one nation.
But yeah, Dr. Besigye, I really want to thank you for that submission, but here's the point. Many Ugandans have been yearning for a clean city. Many Ugandans have been looking for a better way of trading, and I think the government is coming out to solve that problem. You and your friend, Mayor of Kampala, Elias Lukwago, are so badly arguing against this move that is helping the economy at least to look better on the international scene and, of course, increase the tourism sector. So what would be your solution? Just imagine you are the president of the country. What would you have done different?
Yes, you will not understand the solution unless you understand the problem. So from before independence, Uganda has had two entities that are diametrically opposed. There are those who capture power in the country, and there are those who are captives in the country. This, without understanding that, you will not understand the chaos in Kampala. So there are people who are very well off, who want to live in clean environments, who want to have clean roads, who want to have uninterrupted power and so on and so forth. But there are those who have nowhere to live. There are those who have nothing to eat. There are those who are teetering on the margins that have been created by the polity that we are talking about, the injustices that have been compounded over years. So when you say you want to clean Kampala, you want to clean the homeless that you have created. So maybe they should just be killed. That's one way of cleaning the city, getting rid of people they say are causing the city to be dirty and so on. Now, that is not going to be a lasting solution, because the greatest majority of Ugandans are the ones whom you ascribe the filthiness of the city.
Right.
So you have the Kololos, the Nagurus, but you also have the Kivuru, Makerere Kivuru, you have the Katangas of this world, you have the Bwaises, people whose homes flood whenever it rains and everything of theirs is destroyed and so on and so forth. You cannot simply solve that problem by dealing with the symptoms. If you want to solve this problem, you must go to the heart of what created these people that are trying to make a living in a very, very difficult situation.
Yeah, Dr. Besigye, in your opinion, I would like to follow up on the same issue. So what would be the actual cause of the problems that are leading these people to be on the streets?
It is injustice. It is socio-economic injustice. But socio-economic injustice starts with political injustice, that they have no voice. All those people you want to sweep from the city have no voice. And if they had a voice, their money would be used in a way that creates opportunities for them. So you have a country now that provides quality education for very few people, literally no education for the others. So you have a huge knowledge gap in the country. Now, those who have knowledge, who study from good schools, universities abroad, and so on, are controlling the country.
All right.
The other ones who have no capacity. So to end this, you must solve the political problem. The political problem that keeps the majority of Ugandans on the margins. Even those Ugandans who used to live in their villages on their own land has been grabbed. Many people you find in Kampala now are landless.
All right.
They have no other home. So this is not a problem you are just going to solve by an administrative order, by sending soldiers to push them away. It will not go away. You must address the fundamentals, the political injustice that takes away voice from them, then address that will bring them, their voices to the table to say, let's put resources to resolve their problems.
Dr. Besigye, I want to thank you so much. You mentioned a number of things in your submission, and one of them is education. Today, Uganda is now fully open, and students or kids are back to school, which is a good thing for the future of the nation. But there is a high problem of school fees. Parents have been in lockdown for 2 years, and the country has been crying for 2 years or plus, and now schools are open. They're good to go. Their kids are good to go to school. But the fees are too high. In your opinion, as Dr. Besigye, just in case you were the president of the country, or, you know, technically, maybe let me say the mayor or the head ministry of education, what would you, in your opinion, have done to solve the problem for both the parents and the owners of these schools who are facing challenges with loans from banks and a number of other issues? What would be your suggestion to that?
You see, it is all a question of priorities. Uganda is, which is about nearly 50 trillion shillings. That is somewhere around $13 billion, the budget we have for this year. But the question is, who is being serviced by our money? As we talk, as schools are empty because people cannot pay school fees, you will find that there is a supplementary budget for this year that has already been taken by one home of Mr. Museveni, State House, which is the home of Mr. Museveni. He spends about 1 trillion a year. 1 trillion. In other words, about a quarter of the budget is spent by one home. So if we want to resolve the problem of education, education in the 60s was accessible to all children of Uganda, whether from poor homes, whether for children of the rich, they would go to the same schools depending on your own performance at school. All of them would end in the same schools and would advance up to the extent that your ability to learn would take you. So it is not that we were richer then than we are richer now. There is actually more money now than there was then. The problem is the priorities, where that money is spent. The money now is either spent on wrong priorities, servicing the few people. It is spent on securing the few people that control the state, security. Security
you're talking
of
about
the
the security
state,
of the
not
country,
security
correct?
of the people.
You're talking about the security of the country, correct?
Security of the state, security of those in power, not of the country. Security for people. You know, the money they use to bribe politically so that they get support, the money they use to hire all the militias that guard their power and beat anybody who opposes them. That is where the money is spent, rather than spending it on education. So if those people who cannot access education, if their voices could be heard, in other words, if they lived in a democratic country, then they would cause the allocation of money to their priorities.
All right.
Education would have more money. Health would have more money. You know, the small businesses that were destroyed by COVID and so on would be attended to now. Instead, you'll find that when they talk about post-COVID support,
right,
it is going to the big people that have bank accounts that can access money in the Uganda Development Bank. So the priorities will not change unless ordinary people get power.
Dr. Besigye, thank you so much. And of course, some of the questions I'm asking you are coming from real people out there who watch most of our programs and who follow your activities back in Uganda, especially, to be broad, in the opposition. But most importantly, Uganda right now is also facing another big challenge. That's the fuel prices getting as high as never before. And one of the biggest interesting stories here, and I'm happy that you're with me today, is that you're one of the few lucky Ugandans who happen to own a franchise in this oil and gas industry. Now, I want to ask you a question. It's a little bit kind of personal, but did you rip big in this crisis because the prices were high as you want to invest in this kind of business? First, give me that answer, yes or no?
Well, first of all, I hope your understanding of what a franchise is the same as mine. If it is, definitely I own no franchise of any description, whether in the oil sector or in any other sector. The business that is widely talked about, where I relate with the fuel, is that I am a dealer. A dealer is a tenant. I rent one petrol station from Total. At a petrol station at Zambia. It belongs to Total. I only manage it. They bring their fuel. They determine the price at the pump. They determine the price at which I buy it myself. They determine price I buy it, price I sell it. On that petrol station of Zambia. That's the only petrol station that I am a tenant of.
All right.
And so I do not have any control about prices. But the crisis in fuel
Yes.
is part, as I have been saying, of the bigger crisis. First of all, a landlocked country like Uganda should be having a fuel reserve, a large fuel reserve that is capable of taking care of any shocks, any supply shocks, because there can be shocks from all kinds of things. You can have disruption in supply from the coast to Kampala caused by all kinds of things. So any reasonable government must have a reserve. That reserve too could be used to mitigate, to reduce the risks of price fluctuations that are caused by instability on the world market. So if the price is very high, you can stop importing and be using the reserve until the prices go down. Or when the prices are very low, you stock your reserves.
All right.
So any reasonable country should be having a reserve. Regrettably, when this problem that we are having now surfaced, it became clear that in Uganda we did not have a reserve of even 1 liter of fuel. The second problem with fuel is the tax on every liter of fuel. As we talk, the tax on every liter of fuel is close to 2,000 shillings. Now, so if the fuel is 4,000 shillings, almost half the price is tax. So the controller of price is the government that imposes tax. Even for those who have franchises, like, the oil companies and all those who import oil, what determines the price at which they sell is the tax that the government applies on the fuel. Yeah. And high taxation cripples the economy.
All right.
So what should be done by any reasonable government, especially for diesel, which goes in transportation of goods, in the industry, diesel should be taxed as low as possible.
But
when you do that, actually government gets higher tax than when the tax is very high.
So sure, and I want to thank you, but here comes a point where even in the United States where we are today, the prices last year were $1, $2. Right now a gallon is $3, $4. So it looks like it's a global problem that the prices are high. But for Uganda's case, I want to ask you this. Would you agree with me if I say that the prices are so high because of the border conflicts between Uganda and Rwanda, between Uganda and Kenya? Could that be the reason? Would you agree with me?
It is not one reason. That's the point I was making. The fluctuation of prices on the world market is one reason. And that's what I was telling you, that should be mitigated by having reserve. Similarly, the supply routes, the supply lines of the country should be protected by having reserves, so that if there is any shock, and shock can come from anything. You could have a volcano going off in Kenya. You can have riots going on in Nairobi where the fuel passes. You can have all kinds of things. So the country must have a reserve on which to draw when there are shocks in its supplies. Similarly, when there are shocks in the prices, you see the United States, which you are talking about, actually has, I think, the lowest pump price literally in the whole world. And yet, United States imports fuel from the same places that we import that fuel. What you are talking about, in the United States, you'll find that a gallon of fuel is less than $2.
Right.
What is the price of a gallon of fuel now in the United States?
It's 3.99, some is 2.98, so it depends on the location or the state.
Precisely. So now it has gone to 3 point something per gallon. A gallon has 4 liters of fuel.
Right.
4 liters plus of fuel. So in the United States, you are buying fuel less than $1 per liter. Much less than $1 per liter. Here, today, fuel is the cheapest, is about 5,000 shillings, which is about $1.40. And United States has far more rich people than we are. So if United States is selling fuel at half the price of Uganda, why should Uganda, which wants to stimulate the economy, that goods are moving, that you have, because fuel impacts every aspect of the economy.
Correct.
So fuel should, the tax is the difference.
All right.
Fuel should have been taxed much less in Uganda.
Sure, Dr. Besigye, I want to thank you, and please stay on. To our viewers, we want to thank you so much for watching AITV, the Epic Front, and of course being part of this special talk with Dr. Besigye. The economy is like the way he has explained it, and more of that is yet to come. But we want to focus now on the political point of it. Could be that politics could be the reason why Uganda is facing these challenges. In his earlier talk, he mentioned about how the government, poor governance is leading to all that we see, the economic crisis that Uganda is facing. But now I want him to answer to many Ugandans the questions of disunity within the opposition, the complicated situations within both the government and of course the opposition, and they are the leaders who lead different movements. We know of Honorable Robert Chagunya leading the National Unity Platform and the People Power Movement, Dr. Besigye now leading the Red Card, the Front. So, but there is a lot of complicated situations in the country where these organizations are fighting against each other, and I'm sure Dr. Besigye will have an answer for all these questions that many of you have been asking. But let me ask Dr. Besigye for now, before we get into the political points, I would like to know, when you look at the situation in the country today regarding COVID-19, you're one of the few lucky Ugandans who knew how important it was to take the virus very seriously. Do you think Uganda is having some kind of progress? Because when you look at United Kingdom, they have opened up their country. Now it's going to start being a mask-free nation. In the United States here, things are still a little bit tight. We're still putting on masks because of Omicron and of course Delta and COVID-19. But for Uganda's case, Dr. Besigye, you talked so much about it. Do you see any progress in the activities government is doing to address the COVID crisis?
Well, David, first of all, let me say that the impact of COVID on Africa, not just Uganda, has been much less than we have witnessed in the developed world. The reason for this is a number of issues. First of all, Africa has the youngest population in the world. In Uganda, the population above 60 years is only 3%. In the United States, in Europe, in most of the Asian countries, the percentage of people above 60%, above 60 years, is 20% and above. This is the population that is most vulnerable to the COVID disease.
Right.
And yes, and therefore, by sheer numbers, by not having many vulnerable people in Africa, we have not had a lot of deaths and a lot of hospitalizations like those who have higher populations. Secondly, in Africa, we generally have higher immunity in the body because we live in a very highly infested country with all kinds of infections. And so, even as growing up, every child is eating soil, eating insects, or crawling on the ground, in the mud. We build a lot of immunity as we grow up. And so, it seems that we have not been as vulnerable in terms of getting serious disease as those who live in aseptic conditions, conditions that are sterile, that are sterilized. Generally. Thirdly, in Africa, most people live in the open air. In Europe, especially in winter like now, and where you are in the United States and so on, everybody lives inside the houses. Everybody moves by mass transportation in the trains, underground trains and buses and so on, all of which are air conditioned. The air is circulating. And so the spread of the virus is much more facilitated in the developed world than in Africa, where everybody lives alone and in the open without air conditioning. So that's why generally Africa has fared much better than the developed world in this pandemic. Now, coming to Uganda, the government has been presenting a false image that it performed well in controlling the pandemic. That's not true. The virus arrived in Uganda in March 2020. By end of August, 5 months, we had reached stage 4, the last stage of transmission, of the levels of transmission in the pandemic, which is called wide-scale transmission, community transmission, wide-scale community transmission. We reached that after 5 months. And once you reach that, all the measures that were there being applied earlier, contact tracing and all kinds of things of trying to limit the spread of the virus are no longer effective.
All right.
So we have survived really by the grace of God, not because we have taken the right measures to control the pandemic.
Sure, Dr. Besigye, thank you so much for your submission and on the issue of the pandemic. And I think the world is watching, and of course they've picked a lot from it, based from the right person, a doctor who has been there and been studying all as it appears. But Dr. Besigye, the biggest question we have now is the political point of it. The country, Uganda, has so many political organizations with different ideas, but all, in most cases, especially those in the opposition, their aim is to overthrow the President Museveni's government. Today, as we're discussing now, earlier on we saw I would say your son, who I may think, if I'm right or wrong, you may let the world know, he calls you uncle, General Muhoozi Kainerugaba, going out to Rwanda to speak with the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, and recently also saw him in Kenya. This sends a message out there that President Museveni is so serious on the project of employing his son to become the next president. But we are going to come up to that. Let me go straight to the issue of opposition. You are a member, you've been there since at least the 1990s, the late 1990s, and you've seen so many political players coming in and leave. But most importantly today is that last year, Honorable Robert Kyagulanyi, towards the end of the year, on the 31st, released a statement, and I'll quote. It says, "The challenge has always been dishonesty in some cases and inconsistency in other cases. Some actors have clearly placed personal interests ahead of the national interest. There are many lessons we have learned in trying to forge this unity, most of which we did not make public because of giving certain details, and it can easily lead to further mistrust and suspicion." Now, this message was addressing the disunity within the opposition. According to Dr. Besigye, you've been a political player in this game for so long. Why is it up to today the country politically cannot have a united opposition? Dr. Besigye.
Well, David, first of all, as I pointed out at the beginning of our conversation, talking about opposition and the government is rather misleading. It suggests that there is a government that is elected, and there are those who are not elected who form a political opposition. And that, you know, in parliament, there is the government side and the opposition side. This is totally misleading. Uganda has never chosen anybody and raised that person to lead the country since independence. Every leader of our country came to office using guns. Ugandans have never voted anybody out of office. Every leader that has left office was removed by guns. So Ugandans do not have power to bring anybody to office or to remove him.
But
at least
vote
in the last 59 years, we are coming to 60 years, no leader has been brought to office by Ugandans. No leader has been taken out of office by the vote of Ugandans. Every leader who got power, got it by force. Every leader who left power, left by force. So let's first agree that Ugandans have no power to bring anybody to office or to remove that person. If you are operating from that premise, then you cannot talk about a government, an elected government, and an opposition.
But
what happens in Uganda is that power is captured. And I told you at the beginning that therefore what we have are captors, those who capture, and captives, those who are captured. That is the correct terminology. You are either a captor or you are a captive.
But Dr. Besigye, this may seem like a layman's question, but the point is we do have in Parliament of Uganda there is a leader of opposition and then there is a leader of government business. That tells the public that, of course, you people in your opposition may disagree with the point that you have opposition in the country, but what you do in action shows that you believe there is opposition. How would you differ from the rest of people who have such a thought?
There is what is called a facade, what looks like. And what we have today is a comprehensive facade, a show that there is even parliament. Does that parliament have any power? It doesn't. And Mr. Museveni himself has been upfront in saying if they continue causing problems, he can abolish them. They have no power. They sit by being allowed to sit by those who captured power. And if we don't get to grips with those fundamentals, we get lost. If we think that actually there is a democracy, there are elections, there is this, we get lost. So there is a military junta that captured power. I was part of it. I came to Kampala from the bush with a gun. We issued a decree in 1986,
right,
which said, whereas on this day, the 26th of January 1986, the National Resistance Army has captured the power of state of Uganda. It is now hereby vested in the National Resistance Movement. So the power in Uganda was captured. It is captured.
But
what must go on? What the struggles? And so Later on, they created a facade, the facade I'm talking about. And it is the creation of that facade that some of us protested. Because the reason some of us abandoned our professions and indeed went to fight was because we thought we could defeat the guns that had captured our country.
All right.
And then hand over that power to the people of Uganda.
All right, Dr. Besigye.
That is what has failed up to now.
Dr. Besigye, that takes me back to the question I started with on this political segment. There is a lot of disunity within the opposition, and I believe you agree with me. I started with reading for you the statement that was released on December 31st, 2021 by one of the few candidates,
Yes.
former presidential candidates.
You don't have to belabor it.
Or,
You don't have to belabor it.
so what is causing the disunity in the opposition that is now trying to become as a crisis in the country?
So, first of all, those who are listening or viewing us on this program,
Right.
understand this. When few people hold large numbers of people captive, like the British held Ugandans for 70 years captive. These ones have now lasted 36 years. When few people hold many people captive, they use especially four tools to keep them in captivity. If we want to get out of captivity, we must overcome the tools that are used to keep us in captivity. The first one is fear. They inculcate fear in all our heads by terrorizing those who are captives. And this is what has been going on. Secondly, because they hoard all the wealth of the captives, they use money that they control over the country to give favors to some of the captives and to use those same captives against their fellow captives by giving them favor. These people you see calling themselves ministers, they are also captives, but who have been brought and given some favors to work for the captors. The same thing as those who you see in parliament, whether on the NRM side, whether on the opposition side, they are all captives. So they use patronage, favors. Thirdly, they use control of information and propaganda. And that's why they will not allow, whether it is Chamulani, whether it is myself, whether it is anybody raising a different view for people to understand their situation. They will not allow them to speak even on a radio station. They will not allow you to hold a political rally and talk to the people. So that they keep the people informed only by themselves and their propaganda. No. Lastly, the fourth way they keep us in captivity is divide and rule. This was done by the British. It has been done by all successive governments. Any group, any small group that holds a large group of people hostage will cause divisions amongst them.
All right.
Some of what you call political parties that you think are on the opposition can actually be created by those who are holding you captive. And you know, they were about 40 registered political parties.
Right.
Now they are about 20 something. Some of those are actually formed by the captors themselves. And they use all kinds of ways to create divisions amongst the captives so that they don't unite to become a powerful force that can overcome them.
But Dr. Besigye, you and your opposition seem to understand these problems. At least for the last 10 years, the opposition has been talking about these problems, who and how the interim government is trying to divide the opposition. What have you done in the opposition, especially? You've come up with different movements over time. But what do you think you as opposition have to do different this time to us President Museveni? Because you know the problem, you know how the problem is manifested, but you don't have any solution. What could be the solution that you could share with others?
For the last, at least since 2011, on my own part, and those that I have been associated with, we have been focusing on doing three things. Because first of all, we were completely convinced that in this captive situation, where the captors are the ones that claim to organize elections for captives to vote them out, that in such a situation, an election will not cause change. This has been extremely clear amongst us since 2011. And therefore, we have to do three things if we want to cause change. The first thing is for the population, for a large number of our people to understand this dynamic that I am talking about. Because many don't understand it. Many don't know that they are even captives. There is a debate. There are some who think, no, we actually have power. So we have to have a conversation like we are having until a large number of people appreciate and agree on what the problem itself is. So part of the discussions you see amongst what you call the opposition are discussions to cause us to have a common understanding of what the problem is. You may have seen or heard coming up to the last election a discussion about whether elections can cause the change.
Right.
And some people indeed, including my brother Robert, was saying, no, we know democracy works. Elections can work. And we were saying, no, they don't work. So once you are not agreed on what the problem is, there is nothing, you cannot unite to deal with it.
All right. Dr.
So we must have a conversation first to cause us to agree on what the problem is, to cause us to agree on, therefore, if this is the problem, what is the solution? How do we get rid of it? So that we have a common understanding of what the solution is. If we have a common understanding on all these two, then we are united. Then we can move against the problem. And these are the dynamics that have been going on.
All right, Dr. Besigye, it seems like, based on your argument, it seems like you've had discussions before. It's going to be a yes or no question, no answer. Did at any one time the opposition, more specifically the National Unity Platform, ever reach to you during the 2021 general elections to speak with you and say, sir, we need to join hands and have only one candidate to fight against President Museveni this time? Did they ever come to you, yes or no?
I had some interruption. I hope that question you asked was whether the Unity Platform and myself had a discussion about how to deal with the 2021 situation.
Yeah, just present one candidate. Did they ever come to you to speak with you and say, sir, maybe you can support Robert Kyagulanyi, or Robert Kyagulanyi can support you, and just have one candidate to represent? Is it true or no? Because in his statement he said there was a time when they reached out to all of you in different capacities, but there were mistrust and suspicions. So I want to ask you a question, yes or no? Did they ever come to you to agree on such a situation?
No, the answer is simply no. But we had, you see, when you ask a yes or no question, you run a risk. We had deep and comprehensive discussions about how to deal with the impending election, amongst which, as I have been telling you, was whether an election itself, even before you talk about a candidate in the election,
right,
whether an election, whether you have one or two candidates, whether an election is the best way. We had these conversations, or whether we need to organize differently. And as you may indeed recollect, I think it was somewhere around April of 2020, we jointly launched what was called the United Forces of Change. Now, the United Forces of Change, which we negotiated for quite some time, was aimed at taking actions that can cause change apart from elections, outside elections. But as I have pointed out, you know, even though we came to that, I think the focus of most of the people, and not just in the Unity platform, also in FDC and other parties, were focused on the elections. Because you see, part of the problem, and elections are very subversive actually to getting change. Because the reason elections are quite subversive to getting change is that with the economic problems we talked about earlier, political posts, political jobs are now the most paying jobs in the country. A member of parliament earns about 5 times more than a medical consultant earns. And gets, you know, fuel, gets a free vehicle worth 200 million. Medical doctors are on foot. So because they have created these political jobs as dangling attractions, many of our people are not get diverted between focusing on ending the regime, or occupying these lucrative positions within the regime. And that makes it very difficult, especially if you are near an election. It makes it very difficult to focus people to work for the end of the military rule outside the elections. Many people cannot simply see how they can get diverted from fighting to occupy a seat in parliament, become a mayor, become a councillor, become all these things that are very, very attractive. So, although we had discussions about how to deal with 2021 elections,
right,
the greatest majority of people in all parties, not just in the Unity platform, were not very interested in this discussion. And that's why, for me, I pulled back completely and let that motion first be completed, because I understood it indeed that even without the pandemic, which made it even more complicated, I understood it that it would end the way it has ended before. There was nothing at all that was different.
All right. Dr. Besigye, I thank you for that submission. But one last question or two that I have for you is that Uganda faces another problem, especially the reason why I'm focusing on the opposition is because of two reasons. One, Ugandans have just celebrated 1 year since January 2021 elections. And number two, opposition seems not to have the key factors that make a good governance. And one of them is accountability, transparency, and of course focus on the main goal. So would you agree with me that actually the opposition is a big problem to Uganda's success today?
Well, first of all, as I pointed out, and I will continue doing so, I protest the characterization of Ugandans as opposition and government.
Right.
The captives, whom you call opposition, yes, have a problem of leadership. There is absolutely no problem, no doubt. In fact, you may have heard me really saying that we are the problem. The elites amongst the captives. The ordinary people understand, the ordinary people are united even. The ordinary people have no problem, they are ever united. Their problem, they understand it. They understand even how to get rid of it. It's the leadership challenge that keeps us where we are. And as I have said, it's not unique to Uganda. It's not unique to this period of our country. It has been there all these years.
All right.
That's why we must, deliberately focus on it. And that's what we are trying to do. What you call the front, the red card front, or the People's Front for Transition. What it is aimed at is getting everybody that wants change to focus on the crisis, not on ourselves, not on anything. Let's focus, let's unite around this crisis. Let's surround the crisis and let's have a conversation about this crisis first. And that's why the Red Card Front has produced 3 documents. The first one was the crisis, so that we have a discussion and agree whether this is the crisis, that we are captives. That is the essence of that crisis, that we are captives, and that therefore an election organized by our captors will not free us. We need, first of all, agree on this, understand each other on this. But secondly, once we have understood the crisis, let's understand how we can organize ourselves to achieve unity. And we published a document called the Front, the name now, it's a framework of the Front for Transition, which talks about how we can unite, organize against the problem. Thirdly, we published a document called the Transition, Agenda for Transition. Because to get out of all this, first of all, we must defeat the military regime, the military junta. We must get it out of power. And once we do, there has to be a process of transition, and where Uganda reorganizes. As I told you at the beginning of this program, Uganda was forced to become one country. We must, in the transition, recreate what had been attempted in 1962. Have a conscious agreement of how we, the nations of Uganda, can live together and now enforce our agreement. So we must make a new constitution that is made now by free citizens, because even in 1995, the reason the constitution of 1995 has not lasted is because the people who made it did not have power. They were still captives.
Dr. Besigye, thank you so much.
So we must defeat captivity, make a transition to a democratic dispensation.
Yeah,
that's the agenda of the front.
Yeah, thank you so much for actually highlighting that. But that leaves me with a question, Doctor. You say you want to unite all forces that want to see change. But recently, actually immediately when you released the document, or when you released the front to the people of Uganda, now the main opposition party, the National Unity Platform, disagreed. They said, let them do what they want to do, we'll do our thing. Now, that's the reason why I ask you about disunity within your camps. How can you best assure Ugandans that this time your organization is so well praised?
As I pointed out.
Right. Go ahead, sir.
As I pointed out to you, we are simply agents. The people of Uganda are yourselves, you are there. You make the choice whether you want to get out of captivity. All we are doing is simply to exchange information. Nobody has control over anything. We just provide information, provide suggestions of how our situation can become better, and it's up to Ugandans to reach a critical mass of people that think in the same direction. As I pointed out, it's not possible to have everybody on board.
Right.
And if we have made a proposal, like I have said, of how we can get out of captivity, I guess the Unity Platform will also make a presentation to all of us about how we should get out of captivity. And if we find that both are concurring, the point I was making to you about understanding the crisis, if our understanding of the crisis is the same, if our understanding of how we get rid of the crisis is harmonized, then we all move together. But even if that does not happen, the Ugandans who are starving, the Ugandans whom, as I have told you, are now being pushed out of the towns, pushed out of existence. These Ugandans have a duty themselves. They don't have to depend on me, on the Honorable Kyagulanyi or anybody. The Ugandans who want to survive will at some stage say no, enough is enough, as we have seen in other countries. So all we are doing is everybody to try and offer ideas, and that's the best that we can do. Offer ideas, try to offer leadership along those ideas, so that, because if we are agreed on the problem, I don't really know why we should not agree on how we can get rid of this problem, all of us. Some people have been suggesting that maybe the problem is that we are selfish, we want to be leaders. Absolutely not. When I left my medical profession to go to the bushes in Ruwero, I did not believe that I would even come out of Ruwero alive, let alone becoming a political leader. Where I left my hospital job in Nairobi at the time, I was earning a lot of money that I have never earned since. You know, so I at least can tell you without the slightest form of contradiction, fear of contradiction, that once we agree on what the problem is, how we can get rid of it, I have never sought leadership. I don't need anybody. All I need is to live in a country where I have freedom, where I have equal opportunities, and where I can go about my business as freely as possible. I wouldn't like to be bothered, having all kinds of troubles that are associated with the leadership, the kind of troubles that we have lived in all these years. So I am optimistic myself. Struggles take a long time.
Doctor,
it's a learning process. It's a learning process because, as I told you, Uganda is a very, very young country. People who are now very active politically were born in the last 20 years. And these don't know a lot of what we are talking about that we have gone through. So that is also a challenge. We have to keep on talking and informing each other and sharing experiences until we get a critical mass of people that can free themselves.
All right.
And have a transition to a democratic dispensation.
Dr. Besigye, I want to thank you so much for addressing most of these questions. But on this show, we have people who watch us on Facebook, apart from those who watch us locally here or from Brazil. And I would like to have just at least 2 questions from some of our Facebook viewers who have been so eager to hear from you and, of course, raise some few questions. And one of the questions that has come is, actually, this is a little bit funny, but it's also interesting. When are you planning on coming in the diaspora to talk to these people?
Well, I am talking to them even now. I don't, technology has allowed us to talk to each other without having to cross oceans. But I from time to time pop in the US, and by the grace of God, maybe in the course of this year, I will be in the US at some stage. If there is an opportunity to talk at close quarters, we could talk. Right. As you know, my son has been in Boston studying. He's still going to be there, I think. So I tend to come back and forth, and we should have an opportunity to talk. Sure,
and I'm sure they were looking at having a town hall with you. But let me ask you this. This other question is from Godfrey Guy. Said the problem with Dr. Besigye is while you were strategizing and planning, there are malls in attendance in your camps. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do different to solve these problems of intruders into the strategies you're making? Who send a message back to the person you're trying to oppose?
No, we cannot do anything about them. Fortunately, the strategy we chose for ourselves does not need a lot of secrets that we keep away from the people we want to get out of power. Because we chose a strategy of non-violent struggle. And non-violent struggle means it is action by the population at large. For the population at large to act, you must talk to them. You must get them to understand what they need to do. You cannot do that clandestinely. So that's why whatever we want to do, we go on television and say we are going to do this. And people are not defeated because they don't know what we are going to do. It is because they cannot change the conditions of the people. I told you, our people are so marginalized, so discontented that, there is nothing the government can really do to
address it.
Change that.
All right. Dr. Besigye, I want to thank you so much for your time. I thank you for coming and speaking with the people, not just in Uganda, but all around the world who follow Uganda's politics. It means a lot, and it's one way in which information can always go out there. But my last question to you, Doctor, before I let you go is, You've suggested a number of things today on this show, but do you think President Museveni, if he hears your message, he can do something in these remaining 3 to 4 years before we get into the next elections?
Well, he's always doing something. He's always doing something against us. And that is not going to change, because his strategy is indeed to dominate, not just Uganda, but to dominate the whole region, actually. That's why our forces are now in Congo. That's why we are ever fighting with Rwanda. That's why our forces are in Sudan. That's why, he wants to dominate the whole region as Museveni and family. That family rule is not going to change.
All right.
And it's a question of how soon we can simply get rid of it. All because right. the pain that it has caused, you are talking about his son moving around now as the shuttle diplomat.
Yes, he's being prepared for the next government.
The education crisis is superintended by his wife. His brother is the one in charge of the wealth and so on. These Ugandans must simply get together and end this. If you think that Museveni will change course, you must be dreaming wherever you are.
Dr. Besigye, I want to thank you so much for having your time with me, and I hope many Ugandans will listen and hear from you. But I think next time, if we get a chance to talk one-on-one, you and I think we may need to address how Uganda can work with the international community, countries like USA, countries like UK, coming in support to work with you to us, President Museveni. But for now, Dr. Besigye, your final words to the world that is watching you right now.
Yes, on that point, there is sometimes always an overemphasis of what foreigners can do. Really, the United States, Britain, and all these Europeans and so on take a measure at solving the problems of their own countries. They will not be leading in solving ours. We must, the Uganda have a saying that nanyini mufu yakwata awaunya. We must be the ones that will liberate our country. And the sooner we take that responsibility, the better. For me, I have made a decision. I made a decision a long time ago that I will continue doing whatever I can until I am able to live in a free country where I have equal opportunities.
Sure.
I wish you all a happy 2022 year. I wish you prosperity wherever you are, but I wish you all to keep focused on trying to change our country, Uganda, so that it can be a wonderful country that God made it to be.
All right, Dr. Kizza Besigye, I want to thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure having you on the Epic Front. And please, always reach out to us so we can have a discussion in case of any progress. AITV is here to talk about African issues and, of course, link United States or the diaspora to Africa. Thank you so much, our viewers. We always appreciate the time you give in. And for members, we've not addressed all the comments from Facebook because we have so many comments coming in, but to try to address all these key issues. And pretty much very soon, just in case we get Dr. Besigye again, he will have to address some of your questions today. But for now, I want to thank you so much for watching Epic Front and AITV. Keep watching our viewers from Brazil, our viewers internationally, and of course, those who are watching us on social media platforms. We thank you so much and have a great night. Dr. Besigye, thank you so much for always being part of the change that Ugandans need to see. Thank you so much. Bye for now.
You are watching AITV. AITV, connecting the diaspora.